All right, we can go ahead and get started. I'd just like to welcome everybody today to today's roundtable. Before we get started, I'd like to let everybody know that they are on mute and their video is off. But if you would like to ask a question, please use the chat feature to our panelists and we'll get your questions answered. This roundtable is being recorded and the recording will be sent out at a later date. And now I will hand it over to you guys. Go ahead.
All right. Thanks, Jordan. Just to reiterate, thanks for everyone's time. We appreciate it. So just a quick reminder, as with our other roundtable sessions, we'll go for around about 30 minutes. We can certainly extend the session if there's questions that take us a little bit longer. So we're happy to do that. This is part 3 of a 3-part series where Chuck Arico and James Melchor are on the hot seat again. Chuck, as a reminder, is one of our founders and an EVP, and James is our Chief Technology Officer. So again, please feel free to ping Jordan with questions throughout the session, and we'll try our best to address them as they come in. In regard to the content, still carrying along with the same theme of managed services and IT support. In today's session, when we do Q&A, we'll hit a little bit on trends that we've seen throughout the last 14 or 15 months as we've been entrenched with the pandemic, and then also things to come right as we get back to some level of normalcy. So I thought we'd hit on those topics. But let's dig in. And James, I think we're going to start with you. So the emphasis today, at least one of the areas of emphasis, is the IT maturity model, right? And so I'm going to, at this point, flash the maturity model diagram on my screen. And James, maybe if you can talk a little bit about each of the stages within the maturity model. So I'll go ahead and share here. There we go.
All right, thanks, Matt. So basically, the overall IT maturity model really is a five-stage process, but really it's continuous. So just at its base is the chaotic model, where basically what is occurring is unpredictable support. Everything is reactionary. There are no forward-thinking types of policies, procedures, steps. It's if something breaks, what do I do to fix it, right? And really no standards from procurement, hardware, licensing, software, you name it, right? That is that chaotic state, very embryonic type state. And then from there, you have more of a reactive where, okay, I understand these are the technologies I have, but I don't have the proper monitoring and management of these systems. All I'm doing is fighting fires and being reactionary to support them. I don't really have visibility into what's going on from an overall perspective, right? So that could be application support, it could be, underlying platforms, cloud technologies, you name it. And really that is the lack of visibility phase. And then from proactive state is really when you're starting to say, okay, I need to get a handle on this. I need to get the visibility of these systems. I need to understand what's going on. I need to start seeing what type of triggers are occurring. What are some of the precursors to, major issues or service outages or those type of things. And as you can see, risk really it starts on the left side and starts to decrease, because as you get visibility, as you start to get structure within the overall IT maturity model, you can drive down that overall risk, the risk and cost. So, and then really the services phase is when you start to look at IT as a true service or an organizational unit is what I like to call it. So that's when you're saying, okay, the overall IT department or service can really start to drive initiatives for the business, right? It can enable the business, and then that's when you're looking at how do we construct our services to enable the business? How do we be more proactive? What are we doing from a best practices perspective? How do we model these services to ensure we're providing, ultimately value towards the organization? So it's starting to look at IT as an overall program, and treat it in such a way, and really starting to turn it into an enabler for a business. And then you have that value stage, and that overall value stage is when you truly become that strategic business partner for the overall organization. And really, this is when you start to work hand in hand. You understand what the business goals are, what the business initiatives are. You start to look at technology not from the standpoint is, oh, it just runs my servers and all this. It's really, how can I enable the business to move quicker, be a differentiator in the market that they're in, that business is in. So that's really the, at a high level, the 5 stages and how IT, progressing through that overall IT maturity model, drives value to the business, as it's also starting to reduce risk and cost and really help increase the revenue.
Yeah, and James, I guess a follow-up, because we've heard this on occasion in the field, and Chuck, certainly feel free to chime in as well. If you were to put a timeline on, if we were to engage with a client and they were somewhere in between reactive and proactive, and helping them move up that stack, as it were, and drive continuous improvement, what's the timing on that?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it really can vary, Matt. There's a lot of things that come into play from, what was IT really looked at as just a cost center. And if the organization doesn't want to invest to move it up the model, then you have an issue. And what you usually see is, could be a 2-year process, honestly, but usually you could, or more. But usually what you can see is they can move fairly quick. Sometimes you could get as quick as a year, sometimes 18 months. It just really depends on the investment and how quickly how quickly the business wants to kind of bite off and moving through that overall IT maturity model.
Yeah, understood. Chuck, anything to add here?
Yeah, the only thing I would add on to answer that question is it really depends on the size of the organization. So if you've got a 50 employee organization, it might take you 3 months to get to that state. If you've got a 2,000 employee organization, it could, like James said, it could take you 2 years. So it really depends on the size and complexity of the organization.
Right. And from my perspective, value, that 5th phase is kind of the utopia. However, some organizations may never get there. They may, strive, to get there, and will certainly, help every step of the way. But, this puts together a framework and a roadmap to dictate, how, we support the IT operations group to continue to improve. So good stuff.
So Matt, if you don't mind, I just one other comment on that slide is, I always like to also look at that as kind of like a treadmill, right? You're always walking towards that goal. New business trends, new risks, new security vulnerabilities, or things like that, all impact that overall IT maturity model. So it's almost like a continuous treadmill. You're always striving for that goal. So.
Yep. Good point. All right. So Chuck, this one's for you. What are common challenges and or issues that might prohibit organizations from moving up that stack and maturing, their IT operations support model?
So I would say top 4 or 5. First of all, would be if an IT organization lacks any kind of IT strategy, if they don't have any IT strategy in place, that's certainly going to prohibit them from moving up that value chain. And an IT strategy can take on many forms, but overall, the lack of an IT strategy is a big one. The second one, which really has multiple subpoints to it, is if an IT organization has no IT services framework like ITIL or best practices that are used in the industry, that can absolutely inhibit them from moving up that value chain and being considered a strategic partner to the business. And examples of not having some type of IT service framework like ITIL is if you don't have any standard operating procedures or you don't have documented, you don't have any type of change management system or processes in place. You don't have any type of disaster recovery or continuity of operations plan in place. You don't have any proactive monitoring and management. You're in a constant firefighting reactive mode. That definitely inhibits your ability to move up the value chain, as James described. If you don't have any optimized enterprise architecture, then that really inhibits your ability to scale. So making sure that you've got an overall enterprise architecture that is right-sized, and as James said, on that hamster wheel, continually improving and being reviewed every year, significantly inhibits your ability to scale. If you can't scale, you don't achieve that level of maturity. Lack of qualified skill sets as well. And the functions don't always match full-time equivalents. And what I mean by that is every organization needs to have a security function. They need a network administrator. They need a systems administrator. They need an ITIL manager. They need a service desk function. But an organization might not be big enough to justify all those functions with a full-time equivalent. And so it's very difficult for them to justify hiring full-time equivalents when the function can't justify it. And so those are the top ones that come to mind that inhibit IT organizations from really hitting the top of that maturity model.
Great. Thanks, Chuck. And James, I'm sure you've got opinions here. You and your team, being in the trenches with our value clients, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, common challenges are just, I mean, to be honest, our organizational buy-in or a lack of trust into IT. I hate to say it, but you see it all the time. And usually that occurs just because of being in that chaotic state, and they start looking at cost and spend all the time, right? We're spending this amount of money. It's costing the company or organization this amount of money, but we're not really seeing where we're advancing or anything like that, right? They just see all the problems. So that's one of the major challenges that usually we have to get under control, is creating some type of structure there, aligning it to a model, and then really, you start looking at resources and other things like that. But some of the really other ones I would say is just understanding how IT can truly be an enabler to the business. There's always that view of kind of the, I won't say negative perception of IT, but when you can turn that page and show how it can be more positive, and really enable the business, there's some really awesome things, buy-in that comes with that, and you start to move pretty quick. So plus everything Chuck said, I agree with as well.
Yeah, you know what? You took the words right out of my mouth. So I was gonna just chime in with something similar. You have to look at the culture of the organization, right? And
Yep.
do you get buy-in from the executive leadership team? And there needs to be engagement with the executive leadership team so that we get out of this. IT is just another cost, right? Almost a necessary evil to keep those lights on, and shift that culture, right? If we need to help the executive leadership team understand, hey, if you're going through digital transformation, for example, you need technology to be an enabler to get you there, right? To serve the goals and objectives of the business. So yeah, Chuck, James, I think that's spot on. Okay. Well, let's move on. James, we'll start with you this time, and then move to Chuck. How can we help solve some of those issues to advance the maturity model specifically?
Yeah, I think your last comment's a great segue, right? So really, I see it as understanding the culture. What's the state of the IT department? Because that's a big one, right? And one of the biggest things that we see is, we'll go in and we'll kind of have an assessment or do some interviews, and we find out, everybody's like, well, IT's quiet, we have no issues. Well, in reality, what it is end users are very frustrated with IT, so they just stop calling. It's not that, things are status quo and everything is good. So it's understanding the culture, to your point earlier, and start working on that. So demonstrating how to be more responsive. What do we need to do to be more proactive, right? And then really starting to move up that model to being more proactive. And once we start to do that and identify, the systems, applications, policies, procedures, compliance, those type of things, we can really start to be more proactive and pull out like a roadmap and build that out, to really show, okay, here's where you're at, here's where you need to go, here's the buy-in you need along the way, and here are the investments to save, or to reduce some of the costs that you currently have today to improve the overall perception of IT, but to bolster IT and really start to make it become an enabler for the business. So.
Yeah, thanks, James. And Chuck, what's your take?
I agree with everything that you guys have just said. DYOPATH has a waterline model that really illustrates how to properly position IT to enable the business. And I don't want to repeat what James just said, so I'll just say it, that if you want, every IT organization needs to ask themselves, do we want to be in the IT business, or do we want to be in the business of positioning the business to move forward? And having that waterline model and understanding your role in supporting the end users and their processes and making them more efficient will really help you in that maturity model.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. And one of the things that I see a fair amount, and a question that we get is, how if we swing IT support to DYOPATH, how do we know you guys are going to be successful? And so we talk a lot about being driven by metrics and having 20 plus SLAs that we need to adhere to in our managed service agreement. And the bottom line is, we want to get away from that subjective by feel, sort of approach, and be objective. And so if we're tracking metrics, if we're adhering to SLAs, then we can determine what's going well. And I would say as important to that is understanding where there's areas of potential improvement. And we can really baseline where we're at, and then ultimately inject continuous improvement, and help move up that value chain. So that's one of the things that we see a fair amount of is IT operations doesn't have these key performance indicators, aren't tracking metrics, aren't looking at SLOs and SLAs. And so I think there's definitely, I'll just say, some low-hanging fruit to dig into that so that we can drive some continuous improvement. So Chuck.
And Matt, and sorry, just to recap, that everything that we're talking about goes back to the second question, not having an IT strategy or any kind of IT services framework. And everything that we're talking about here is as a result of not having those in place.
Yeah, great point. Okay, so Chuck, carry on with you. What's at stake for an organization if IT doesn't go down the path of trying to continuously improve and move up that value chain? And if you and James have specific examples, we'd love to hear them.
Sure. So I've been doing this now for close to 30 years, and every single organization I have ever been engaged with has some sort of exit strategy. And what I mean by that is If it's a privately held organization and they want to sell the company one day, that's their exit strategy. If it's a family-owned business and they want to continually um, uh, have the second generation, third generation inherit that business, they want to be as profitable as they can. If it's a publicly traded company, they have shareholders that they have to be responsible for. And so every single one of those is considered an exit strategy. And if you don't have the scalability in your IT organization, then that will significantly impact the transactional value that you have in your company. And what I mean by that is if most organizations should be, and if they're not, they should be in business to create maximum value for themselves and for their customers and for their employees. And if you have a non-scalable, highly reactive, unstructured IT organization, that significantly impacts your scalability and your ability to expand and decrease as economic times will allow. That also impacts your supply chain. It also impacts your customer satisfaction. And I have use cases where I have seen where the IT organization does not adopt any of these concepts that we're talking about, and it has significantly diminished the transactional value of that organization because so much investment has to be reinvested into IT to right size them and get them back to where they should have been 5 years ago. And so that's probably from a value standpoint, that's one of the biggest impacts of if an IT doesn't go down that path of continual improvement.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. James?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Chuck. My perspective on that would be, is really it impacts the life expectancy of that organization. I know that's kind of going, all the way to one side of the spectrum, but in reality nowadays IT is so ingrained, it is in the DNA of the organization, and really what you start to do is hinder a lot of things, right? You hinder operations, you become a large opening for vulnerabilities and risk and security issues, right? If it is not moving in that direction of continuous improvement, you can cripple the brand. You basically make yourselves not really not a market leader, right? So all of those things from an IT perspective, if they are not trying to go to that continuous improvement process and moving through that maturity model, directly affects the effectiveness of the overall business. And in short, it reduces the life expectancy of that overall organization, especially if the organization doesn't realize what's occurring, right? Sometimes you'll see it too late, as well, to Chuck's point, right? So, that's kind of my view. If you don't jump on that bandwagon of IT maturity, it's really going to hurt your organization. So.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm going to piggyback, or I'm going to jump on this life expectancy, thought here. All right, so being from Chicago, I love pizza. There's this raging debate, right, around New York style or deep dish. And so if you look at, for example, and I grew up in the 80s, so you had Domino's and you had Pizza Hut. And if you look at what's happened over time, you take Domino's and the digital transformation that they've gone through and the market share that they've captured in driving continuous improvement. It's really interesting to see. I mean, they're kind of a model for digital transformation. There's a bunch of articles online that you can read. And if you look on the opposite end of the spectrum, Pizza Hut, which was very focused on in-store and dining experience, and then didn't make the pivot. And the largest franchisee in North America had to file for bankruptcy last year because they didn't make that pivot and they weren't focused on continuous improvement. Those are two really interesting case studies. And IT, the architecture, the configuration, the operations that supported it, either enabled, or really, impacted and killed off a significant amount of business. So I thought that was an interesting one.
Yeah, and it's very true too. And I think also that Pizza Hut focused on deep dish and Domino's focused on style, which is right. Sorry, carry on.
I don't know
Carry
about, I
on.
don't know about.
I should have seen that coming. Good stuff. All right, we're about 5 minutes out here. So I think we probably have time maybe for one more question. So, this is another one that comes up quite a bit. Every organization has unique needs as it relates to, IT operations and support. And so what I mean by that is, they're in some form of vertical typically, right? So there's applications that are line of business or vertical focus. There's industry lingo. There's different OEMs. There's different hours of operations, right? It's never one size fits all. So James, what approach and methodology during the onboarding process, and then over time, do we use to integrate our team and our services with IT operations in an organization?
Yeah, so from that approach, really, I will say it's the business first approach, right? I think a lot of people focus on technology, a lot of people focus on other areas, but really it's the business first approach. It's understanding what the business requirements, the business needs are, how do they generate revenue, how an organization generates revenue, how do they support their clients, what is kind of, I would say, what are their goals, what is their core values as well, and understanding that, because there has to be a cultural alignment between ourselves and an organization as well. We need to understand what's important to them and then how they deliver it. That's the first phase of it, and then really it's okay, let's develop that IT strategy, and really focusing on that and understanding, okay, here are the business goals, here's how they operate, here's the culture, here's the expectation. Now let's deliver on that, enable that through the technology, and build out that technology plan and architecture. And then from there, it's how do we to talk about the continuous improvement piece of it is how do we support that, right? So now we're aligning the business needs, we're aligning the technical requirements, and then how do we support that, and putting the right support structure in place tailored to that business. That's really what, I would say we need to focus on, within the first 60 to 90 days to ensure that we are delivering to the expectation of the business and what the business expects to deliver to their clients as well.
Yeah, well said. And Chuck, any thoughts from you here?
Yeah, James is absolutely, I was going to answer the same way, business first approach. And I will just drill down a little bit in more detail on the first silo of the business first approach, because I think it's really important that this is what, I mean, put a little sales pitch here, what separates DYOPATH from almost every IT managed services provider that I've run into. And that is that in our business first approach, understanding the business, the first thing that we do is we understand what those value streams are. And what that means is how does an organization make money, right? How do they generate revenue? How do they generate profits? Understanding those value streams. Then the next thing we do is we look at what are those functions that support those value streams. So you have to have accounting, you have to have sales, you have to have HR, you have those major functions that support those value streams. And then once you've understood those functions, what are the processes, end-to-end processes within each one of those functions? You have to make sure that you have documented them, understand them, and optimize them as much as you can in order to make sure that your organization is as efficient as possible. And you'll notice the first three, the value streams, functions, and the processes, has nothing to do with IT. So we look at those first. We then look at the applications that support those processes, right? So you need an oil and gas application to help you find oil. You need an accounting application to help you bill your customers. You need a CRM to manage your customers as well. So we understand what those applications are and how they support those processes. It's not until then do we even begin to look at the underlying infrastructure that supports those applications, because most organizations make the mistake of building an infrastructure and then going out and buying applications. And that's the wrong way to do it. You've got to understand what applications you're supporting, and then you build your engine to support those applications. Once you've got that infrastructure designed and right size, as James said, you then look at what is the right support model to support that infrastructure. So every step of the way has been right sized and optimized. So when you come down to the support at the end of that business first approach, you know that you've got an optimized support model supporting an optimized infrastructure. And then you implement that continuous improvement every 6 months or so to make sure that as the business changes, if it does, that support model can change with it.
Yeah. Thanks, Chuck. And it looks like we're at the 30-minute mark. So Jordan, do we have any questions?
Questions, but we do just have one comment, and it says, it also sounds like organizations without IT maturity are inherently more vulnerable to cybersecurity attacks.
Without a doubt, that is, cybersecurity is weaved into any discussion we're having about IT operations, certainly. And we spend a lot of time in webinars in the field and roundtables, addressing cyber. So happy to have an offline conversation in more detail on that topic. Okay, well, appreciate everyone's time. We're going to have to invite Chuck back so that I can get one over on him, maybe with barbecue or something like that. But again, thanks for your time. We will be posting this on our YouTube channel, and we'll get a recording out to the attendees. So everyone have a great day.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Take care.